So thankful that you're here at the 8 o'clock in the morning slot on Wednesday of Connect. I'm so thankful to be back at Connect. I absolutely love just talking to people. I love coming to this event and just hanging out with people like Mario. Wave, Mario. Mario's from Microsoft. We love Microsoft. We love Minecraft. Okay. Thanks so much for coming. So my name is Brian Aspinall. I'm an elementary school teacher from Southern Ontario. I've been in the classroom for a little over a decade now. And everything I'm about to share with you today is ideas, I guess, that kids challenged me with. Pushed my own thinking and made me sort of rethink my own pedagogy. Because when I started teaching grade 7 and 8, 12 years ago, I was told intermediate teachers run a tight ship. And I had no reference point other than my intermediate experience, where I had a grade 8 teacher who wore a tie and we were afraid to talk and we sat in quiet rows. That was my only reference point. That's all I knew. And so that's how I taught in my first couple of years, and it sucked. It didn't work for me, and it certainly did not work for the kids in my classroom. So here we are to talk about coding, Internet of Things, computational thinking. Still people coming in. That's okay. It's a teacher session. Teachers are never on time. I know this. Now you're going to sit in the front row, though. Brave. I'd be at the very back corner. All right. Here we go. Clicker.
Canadians explain.
We don't have audio. Sound up there? I'm going to start with a video, because our kids are super smart. These are Canadian kids.
You can't see yet.
The internet is a large space full of things.
Made out of electricity. A virtual world. Technology sort of comes from space.
Something along those.
The best thing ever. Energy.
Those little lines on your iPad. Electricity that helps your phone work. I honestly don't know how to explain it.
I don't know how to explain it, but
I can't really explain it.
But if you don't have Wi-Fi, you couldn't download apps and stuff. You don't want to see me if there's no Wi-Fi.
We've all got one of those in our class.
This fast. It fast. Internet has to be this fast. I want my internet to be this fast. I don't want this fast.
Like a Bugatti, a car with jets at the speed of light. If I was traveling the speed of the internet, my face would probably be melting off.
I don't know how to explain it, but it's very fast. I don't want slow Wi-Fi. I use the internet to learn how to type texting and watching YouTube. I bought a movie. Teacher knows how to do makeup. I like to watch movies about Cooper Army.
Oh, video games.
Games, YouTube. My favorite thing to do on the internet is watch toy reviews.
I just have to remind him.
In the future, I think the internet will work even better.
It would like charge your phone. Internet in the future will be like, internet, I want a cheeseburger delivered to my window.
With hoverboards evolving into something different.
Buildings would be like bent like this.
I love the internet.
I love it a lot.
I like the internet a lot.
Dear internet, you guys are so awesome. It is awesome.
Dear Mr. Internet, I love
She was
that
like
you made me
fanboying. So, I mean, those are Canadian kids. I love video because I think we make a lot of assumptions in education about what our kids know. I know that I do, 13-year-olds in my class, in terms of what they know about the internet, what they know about technology. And it's a fascinating video because we're about 2-3 years away from the Internet of Things era, and so that's something that we have to be mindful about, something we have to talk about, and I guarantee that we're going to see 30 proposals on Internet of Things at Connect 2019. So we're 2 years away from more objects being connected to the internet than people. So what does that mean? Well, we're all concerned with data, we're all concerned with privacy and education, as we should be, but it means that whatever a kid's pencil case looks like in 2020, there'll be more devices in that pencil case connected to the internet than that student themselves. And so we have to teach our kids to be mindful of privacy and data and all of those pieces, but we also have to recognize that the off and away posters that I still see all over the country, we have to think that through, because you can't ban every device connected to the internet moving forward in that Internet of Things era. So talking about Internet of Things and coding here and assessment is a big part of the conversation this morning. It's because the coding piece is just so kids have an awareness about how all of these devices work, how devices that are tracking their behavior, marketing their data, selling their data. Machines are going to make decisions based on all of that data without the kids and us adults knowing. How do we prepare kids for that era? And it's kind of, in my mind, it's like 10 years ago, 15 years ago when we entered the social media decade. It was uncharted waters in education. We're about to see that again with Internet of Things. So the coding conversation for me, it's not just about coding. I'm not going to stand here today and teach anyone to code. That's not what I'm about. I am a coding to learn person. I'm not a learning to code person. We've evolved. We've moved past that. So the idea of coding to learn helps kids understand how all of these devices work. Now, I have to go back in time. My clicker, we've got a lag. Click, click, click. Still clicking. Here we go. I guess I have to stand over here. So I have to start with a story that some of you may have heard, but it's
Canadians.
This is my first time, so bear with me. I'm a little bit nervous and shy. I'm a bit of a So here's my truck. I got to tell you a story, and some of you may have heard the story, but it's important and it's relevant because in education, math scares the crap out of all of us. If you want to throw coding and computational thinking into that same bucket, we're all like, oh, I don't know what to do with this stuff, let alone assess and evaluate. So let me go back and tell you this story because hopefully it'll make some connections for you. So I drive a Mazda B4000 pickup truck, 300,000 kilometers, changes its own oil, and it's terrible in the snow. Anybody have a Ford Ranger, two-wheel drive pickup? You know what I'm talking about. You have to put all kinds of weight in the back or it's absolutely treacherous in the snow. I put my dogs in the video for the heartstrings piece, so you're all like, oh, he's human. He has dogs. So on 3, everyone go, ah, 1, 2, 3. You, mission accomplished. So my wife's texting me a couple years ago. I was coaching a senior boys basketball team, and you know what it's like in Ontario in January. It gets dark at about 3:30 in the afternoon. Snow's blowing everywhere. We're just south of London, about 2 hours south of London, and so the snow blows off of Lake Erie. The roads are just a mess. My wife's texting me saying, you might want to get home. The roads are bad. Of course, I'm coaching basketball, so we have a basketball practice. You know, basketball practice ends at 5, but you've always got that parent that shows up at 6:15. Right? And the kid's like, no, I can walk home. And I'm like, no, I'll end up in the blue pages because something will happen and I'm not ready for that. I want to get in the blue pages for other reasons. So I stayed, right? I stayed, and then I finally got the mom came, whatever. Yeah, I had to work late. Sorry, yeah, take the kid, whatever, go home. And so I'm driving home. I'm speeding and, driving about 72 kilometers an hour, rushing just ever so slightly, and I finally pull in behind her. And because I was in a hurry, I lucked into this. Lesson number 1. Rushed, I made a mistake. Lesson number 1 for students. I rushed and I made a mistake. I wasn't taking my time. So I said a few choice words, kicked the tires, thinking that would magically unlock the truck. Went in the house and said, honey, I have a problem. She went, I know. I went, no, seriously. Like, I screwed up. The truck's behind your car and you don't want to drive the truck in the snow. You have to leave before me in the morning. Your school starts before me. You want to follow locksmith. That's going to be expensive. What do you want to do? She says, I don't care what you do to solve the problem. She's an intermediate teacher. Solve the problem, she said. I thought, okay, that's a very, very interesting thing to say. Now, by this point, I realize that she's level 3 hangry. All the guys in the room are afraid to laugh at the hangry joke every time we make it, and all the women are like, So I grabbed a granola bar for a moment of clarity. I sat down on the couch and I thought, what would my students do if I pitched them this open-ended kind of problem? I've locked my keys in the truck. How do I solve this problem? Immediately they want to say, break the window. And immediately I want to throat punch them and say, it's January. I'm not breaking the window and driving around with a garbage bag on my truck. I'm not that redneck yet. So I'm not breaking the window. So I got on the computer and I thought, you know what kids would do? I have to get close to the machine so that this joke hits. Boom! Kids would get on the internet. So I got on the internet and I binged how to break into Mazda B4000 pickup truck. Anybody banged? Mario, where are you? So I banged how to break into a Mazda B4000 pickup truck, and I learned through this process. I don't actually drive a Mazda B4000 pickup truck. It's a Ford Ranger with different clothes on. It actually says Ford Motor Company under the hood. And I'm the schmuck that paid more money for the same truck with the Mazda clothes on it. But I learned as I'm Googling this that there's a whole variety of videos on how to break into a Mazda B4000 pickup truck. Based on year, based on make, based on color. And consider the context, right? Because I'm sitting on my couch, isolated, frightened, wind is blowing outside, snow, it's Armageddon, my wife's hangry, so I'm terrified of that, and I went, I am part of a much larger community of 143,000 that also banged how to break into a Ford Ranger. Watch this video.
Today we're going to show you how to unlock Ford Ranger. It's locked. It's easier. What you want to do is take a little tool like this, make a little hook on it, around each hand. Okay, so come over your door. There's a little. Okay, so there's the two holes, and you got to pick one. Probably this one on the right. Get your little hook in there. So now what we're going to do is angle the rod towards the little, toward that lock. Yeah, the lock mechanism. And you can see it moving.
You realize that there's two people. There's a camera person. Is he gonna do it? I wouldn't have shown you the video if he didn't. So you know. Oh, success! Just saved me $300.
You're open. Get your
Wait,
keys.
wait. Don't do that again. So I've seen the video a few times now, but what's so cool and fascinating and relevant to me is our young people want to create content for the internet without us asking them to do so. So as long as it's meaningful to them. I have no idea why this person created this video. But as a language arts teacher in Ontario, I hear procedure, explanation, purpose, and values. And it's a product. It's a student product. We have a media product that we can assess and evaluate. We can have conversations around that without me asking this student in particular to do that. But what's so fascinating, not just about the video and that young people want to create content for YouTube, they've written the transcript in the video. So I had a step-by-step procedure. Now, where I'm from, we actually teach procedural writing explicitly. So now I've got a product on the internet without me asking this young person to do it. Can I assess and evaluate? Absolutely. Can we have conversations? Absolutely. Because it's relevant to them. In the procedure, it said at the bottom, you'll be able to break into your truck in 30 seconds flat. And I'm a bit of a gamer, so I took that as a challenge. I said to my wife, I got this. I grabbed my phone, I went outside. Guess my first score. That I appreciate you. I gave this talk at TDSB and somebody was like, 2 hours. I'm like, you really think I was outside for 2 hours in my driveway? 42 seconds, and I wasn't happy with that, so I locked my keys back in the truck. And I did it again. Now here's the thing. It's a great story that I like to start with, because in computer science world, we call a set of instructions an algorithm. In science class, we call it a procedure. In language class, we call it a procedure. But it's the same thing. A computer follows a set of instructions to perform a task. And so, just like coding, we've got a set of instructions. We've been teaching this since the beginning of formal education. The question is, how do we make those connections to all of the technology piece? But not just the fact that it's an algorithm. The bigger piece here is I got immediate feedback from the environment. I'm doing a lot of reading on Reggio Emilia. I got immediate feedback from the environment. I tried something, wasn't good enough, and tried again, and tried again, and tried again, until I got better. That's what the coding space is about, and that's what we have to think about when we talk about math education, because math isn't a score, math is a process, right? Golf is a score, basketball is a score, math isn't a score. So we have to think about what it means to fail at school. Now, I'm going to switch gears. I have to talk about my grandfather because he was one of my favorite teachers. He was a geologist. He taught in Sudbury. And so at March break, my parents would put us on the train in Windsor and send us up on our own when I was about 13, 14 years old, and my brother was about 10. And we would go and we would hang out with my Nana and Papa, and we would go visit his school because no one was there because it was March break. And so it was a very hands-on approach in his science classroom. Science has always been very, very much hands-on. It doesn't have to be about the textbook stuff. But we would mix chemicals and make observations and change variables and look for different outcomes, which is exactly what we're talking about in the coding space and what we should be talking about in the math space. So when he was diagnosed with Alzheimer's later in life, we were all devastated. I didn't know about Alzheimer's at all. And doctors kept throwing us pamphlets, and I would read everything I could read about it. But nothing prepared me for Alzheimer's so much than experiencing it, watching it actually happen. There wasn't a piece of literature anyone could have given us. And I think about that when I design tasks for my class. I'm not suggesting that textbook lessons are a terrible idea. I just want to know how to bring them to life to make them meaningful, because everything I read about Alzheimer's did not prepare me for what I was about to experience. And now we live in a world where people write computer code so I can go visit his house on Google Street View or Microsoft Street Side without actually leaving my house. I can fire it up on the computer and I can type in his address and I can stand there and I can look at his house like I once did, because some computer scientists decided that they wanted to archive our planet in visual format. But here's the question of the day. Your first tweet. Has anybody tweeted yet? Oh, a few of you have tweeted. Here's your first tweet. Not that. See, I'm click happy today. Today's technology is the worst technology our students will ever use. Something to think about. I don't own this quote. I heard it from Jamie Cassup a few years ago, who's a phenomenal speaker. And the idea is, I still see off and away signs posted all over North America. Granted, I understand the logistics, the liability, the accountability. We have to figure that stuff out. Heading into the Internet of Things, we just have to figure out how to manage devices properly. Do you remember the Commodore 64? Today's iPhones are our kids' Commodore 64. So in that mindset, as an intermediate teacher, I am always asking my wife, how do we create a culture of independent problem solvers? In my experience, as a 7 and 8 teacher in Ontario, only in my experience, not claiming this is fact by any means, kids come to us after grade 6 and they want to be told what to do to get the grade, and it drives me bonkers. Granted, they just wrote EQIO in the spring, so what do I expect when they come to me in grade 7? Give me the success criteria, give me the learning goals, give me the rubric, tell me what I have to do because I want to get the grade. The grade is the most important thing. And the kids that are not intrinsically motivated by grades, they're already doing whatever the hell they want to do in class anyway. We just have to harness that and find the curriculum in there. So how do we create a culture of problem solvers in our classroom? When I started teaching, about 2003, 2004, a group of boys approached me. I had an LTO. I got it in March of my first year out of the faculty. I was very fortunate. And a bunch of boys approached me on the playground. They were in grades 7 and 8, and they said, "You study computer science?" I said, "Yeah. Why are you teaching?" I said, "I don't know, but it's fun." And they said, "So can you teach us how to program?" I said, "Yeah, I think so." And to be honest with you, I'm not standing here because I'm super progressive by any means. That's not the case. I actually feel like the biggest fraud around. I studied computer science, and we teach to our strength. Coding was my strength. It's all I knew. And I took a lot of math when I was in university, so I tried to integrate coding into my classroom as often as I could. So these boys approached me, and they say, "Can you teach us how to make a game?" And I said, "Yeah, okay, this sounds good." I went down to the principal's office. I said, "All the sports teams are coached," right? I'm sucking up so I can get a contract job. "All the sports teams are coached. I have to volunteer in my new school. What am I going to do?" "I know. I'm going to start a coding club because they want to do this thing." So we're sitting in the lab. Now, Scratch was a download in those days. Do you remember when Scratch was a download? By the way, raise your hand if you've ever used Scratch. Like 3 years ago, I asked that same question here, and like 2 hands went up. That's how far we've come in a short period of time. But what's fascinating
Scratch is like 17 years old. It's not new technology. It came out in 2003, 2004, and it's built on logo, like decades of pedagogy and research. Anyway, Scratch was a download. So I downloaded it to a USB key. The USB ports were blocked in 2004 in my board. So I remember looking at these boys sitting in the computer lab. I said, boys, take the firewall. And they looked at me and they said, can you? I said, huh? We created a train of students and myself plugging in USB keys, trying to install Scratch 1.4, hide the icon from the image so IT didn't know, and we were off and running. Keep in mind I was trying to get a job. Okay, I was an LTO trying to get a job. I said, what game do you, what do you want to make? And they said, we want to make the pooping baby. Okay, still trying to get a job. What do you want to call it? Poop Storm. I know what you're saying, Brian Bradley, who's now in his 20s. I know what you're saying. Anyway, these kids said, we want to make this pooping baby game. Can you show us how to program a computer? We've heard of this thing called Scratch, and I'd never heard of Scratch. I mean, this was 12, 13 years ago. We installed it in the lab. We hung out after school. I watched this thing start to go back and forth. I sat down beside them. Granted, I went to the University of Windsor, sponsored by Sun Microsystems, so we wrote a shit ton of Java in those days. So I'd never experienced Scratch. I didn't know that you would link block code together without writing syntax. It was all blew my mind because I spent 6 years writing a ton of Java, obtaining my 4-year degree at the University of Windsor. So we're sitting in the computer lab. I said, how did you make the baby go to the right? He said, it's so simple, Mr. A. You go one green flag, change X by 1. So I did that, and the baby went, punk. It worked. They were like, what do you mean? I said, oh, when you program things with syntax, it never, ever works the first time through. Never. Not from my experience anyway. I said, but it just went, how do you make it go the whole way? And the second I said that, I thought, well, you have to put it in a loop. But I want to know if they know that. They said, Mr. A, put it in a forever loop. One green flag click, forever change X by 1. I did that. The baby went to the side of the screen. I was so impressed. I kept dragging it back, letting it go, just to watch. Like, it's doing it. They're like, you're lame. I know, but it's working. It's actually doing what I programmed it to do. How did you make it go backwards? I don't see a turnaround command in the Scratch environment. Mr. A, when it touches the side, change X by -1 forever. And I went, wow. You have to tell me about the poop missile algorithm. The poop, by default, is hidden, and it shows itself at the baby's location, and then it goes to the bottom of the screen. By now, I'm sweating bullets. I'm pacing around the computer lab. They're like, Mr. A, are you having a stroke? I'm like, I think so. Let me paraphrase what you're doing here in the Scratch environment. They went, okay. I went, you have a baby at a constant positive Y position, translating back and forth by changing X from positive to negative. It reflects when it touches the perimeter of the screen. The poop missile, hidden by default, plots itself at the baby's location on a Cartesian grid and translates to the bottom with a forever change Y by -1. If you catch the poop missile, you get a point. For every point caught, the poop missiles start going faster. You're storing that in a variable. I went, yeah. I went, holy shit! Pun intended. You just did like 12 grade 7 and 8 geometry expectations. I went home that night. I said, honey, I have a problem. Again, she went, I know. I said, no, you don't understand. I have photocopied 300 pieces of grid paper. I've got the tub of mirrors ready to go tomorrow. And she said, I don't understand. So do you expect me to tell these kids to translate a polygon on grid paper after this experience? I don't know. And it got me thinking about Scratch, and it got me thinking about my approach to math. Not that there's anything wrong with mirrors. I mean, we need those tangibles, and it's important for kids to go through the manual process of doing that stuff. But in those experiences, it's kind of an isolated expectation in terms of what we're doing, where here, we were doing all of that geometry. We were doing some algebra. We were at least talking about variables. So much more, spiraling our math curriculum beyond the silo. And in those days, me following the textbook, I taught math in that silo. So I got on the computer. I thought, I got to figure out where this Scratch thing comes from. And I learned about Reggio Emilia and play-based learning and the environment giving feedback, which is exactly the experience these boys had in that computer lab. They would try something, it didn't work, they would try it again. I'm learning about Reggio Emilia. I start reading about constructivism and Piaget, and then I come across Mr. Seymour Papert, the unofficial godfather of educational technology. Raise your hand if you're familiar with the work of Seymour Papert. Wow. I'm like preaching to the converted here. Not a lot of people know who Seymour Papert is. Unfortunately, the world lost Seymour Papert last summer or 2 summers ago now. But he was a bit of a disruptor, and he said things like this. He challenged computers. He challenged computer labs. He challenged school systems. You know, why is technology an event in your school? Why do we sign out the computer lab on Friday afternoons every Friday and put our kids on Math Circus while I mark papers at the back? I did that for a long time. I'd go down in September and I'd write Aspinall in pen. Friday afternoon block all year. That's my computer lab time. Math Circus. Papert would challenge those things. He would say, why is technology an event? It needs to be embedded in practice. We don't go to the pencil factory to learn about pencils for 40 minutes a week. So, the work of Papert is fascinating because he was playing with robots long before, like, quote unquote, robots were cool. This isn't obviously dash and dot. It's got a giant cable attached to it, but watch these kids collaborate, trying to draw spiral art in the 80s on the ground by tweaking variables, by changing variables. So Papert was a mathematician, and he had a kinesthetic, constructivist approach to learning mathematics. Hands-on, get out and experience it, and then try and do it on the computer. And if you could do that, there was a sense of application, a sense of mastery. So already we're talking about math not being a score, not being based on right or wrong, but being based on a process, being based on an experience. And so, as all of you know, because you're all super smart with the work of Papert, we've got Logo, created in 1967, 68-ish by his team. That's the part that's mind-blowing, because the whole coding trend, the whole coding narrative today is not new. It's decades old. It didn't catch on, I guess, for a variety of reasons that I'm not entirely sure about because I wasn't around in those days. But my hunch is technology was really expensive and computer labs were isolated and hard to get to. But the Logo experience, how many of you programmed in Logo? Remember? Oh my goodness. He created Logo as a mathematician so kids could learn about computer code and be creative while exploring math. But here's what's cool about his approach with Logo and spiraling math. He would like tape an equilateral triangle on the floor. Okay? He never used masking tape because that pisses off the custodians. He would use the sports tape and tape an equilateral triangle on the floor. And he would say, okay, kids, I want you to walk the perimeter of the triangle. Count your steps. There's a reason steps is the unit of measure in Scratch. Count your steps. 10. 10, 10. What do you know about equilateral triangles? And I'll put that out to you. What do you know about equilateral triangles? Yes, they are. All sides are equal. Math is hard at 8 o'clock in the morning in Niagara Falls. I think all of you went out last night and were a bit foggy today. Because it's nice to be away from home and school. I get it. Equilateral triangles, all sides are the same. All angles are the same. The sum of all interior angles of any triangle is 180 degrees. So then he says, okay, walk that first leg, that first side length. How many steps was it? 10. Now we're going to get on the computer and we're going to make the turtle draw that. So kids get on the computer now. So we're going to use forward 10. You can't change the words, but you can change the numerical value. Forward 10. And then he would say to them, okay, we're going to use right to draw the angle. What's the numerical value? Loud. Nice and loud. If it's 60, yell it out. You're wrong. But he encouraged the mistake. That's the thing about coding and Papert and my body of work. Encouraging the mistakes in math. He would say, okay, 60, do it, try it, and then it wouldn't work. It wouldn't draw it properly. And he would say, get back on the triangle. The kids would come back out. They would walk their 10, and then he would say, turn. Here we go. And he would say, did you turn acute or obtuse? And they would say, I don't know what that means. teachable moment. Did you turn bigger than 90? I think so. You get the big wooden compass that we used to use on the chalkboard and put it down on the floor. Oh my goodness, I turned 120. Yes, you have to turn yourself and the turtle 120 degrees to draw the 60-degree angle. Now, these students were younger than the curriculum that talks about supplementary angles. But as a byproduct of the process, that's what he was teaching. So he was spiraling his math and teaching beyond the grade level through this approach by having kids construct their own knowledge kinesthetically first and then doing it on the computer. And I've got a couple of quotes from his book written in 1980 because this is really fascinating. 1980, Mindstorms was written, and Lego Mindstorms obviously comes from this. Many children are held back in their learning because we have a model of learning in which you either got it or got it wrong. But when you program a computer, you never get it right the first time. So while we're here talking about coding, let's take coding off the plate. Let's put coding away for a second because the bigger picture is pedagogy. How does this apply to any subject area, particularly math? Let's focus math. Phys ed, that makes perfect sense. My kids don't know how to make a friggin' foul shot. They don't know how to serve a volleyball. They don't get it right the first time. That's why we practice. That's why we have practice. That's why we do training sessions. That's why we do drills, skills and drills. So take coding off the plate. What does that look like in math class? When math is scored based on a quantity of correctness. That's something we have to think about, math not being scored on a quantity of correctness. Now, today we have Mitch Resnick, who was a student of Papert, and Papert was a student of Piaget, so we've got decades of constructivism, pedagogy, and research leading up to today. Okay, so Mitch Resnick was a student of Seymour Papert's. He built Scratch with his team at MIT to continue the work of constructivism and creativity and coding, all of those other pieces. Scratch was built based on 4 principles, 4 Ps, passion, project, peers, and play, and developed in 2003, 2002, 2003, somewhere around there. Those are some really big ideas when you think about competency, 15, 17 years ago. So we have Scratch today. Mitch Resnick's got a wonderful TED Talk. To quote him, he says things like, we learn to spell so that we can write sentences. We learn to write sentences so that we can write paragraphs. And we do that so we can write poetry, so we can write stories. We learn to read so that we can read to learn. And coding is no different. So we're at a time in education where finally we're moving past the learning to code stage. It's been around for a long time. We have to head into that coding to learn stage. It's not just about moving Sphero around the floor. It's about moving Sphero around the floor because I'm studying the Cartesian grid, for example. And so beyond the simple coding narrative, this is a friggin' buzzword as far as I'm concerned. Computational thinking, I apologize, that's cut off a bit, but you can probably infer what it says. Computational thinking is kind of the bigger idea, and basically it's the synergy of the human mind and the machine to solve efficient problems, to create solutions to problems that we don't already have solutions to. And coding is a part of it. But coding and computational thinking are not necessarily synonymous. I like to tell people, like telescopes to astronomy, coding is to computer science. Right? Those are not synonymous. There are a lot of pieces to computer science, and in particular, computational thinking. And so we use the word computational thinking kind of as a generalization to have kids use technology to create solutions. Well, I was studying, I was at grad school at Western, and I saw this Venn diagram come across my page. So my research. So if you don't agree with anything in there, I'll give you the author and you can email them. Don't come after me because I've had that happen. And I'm like, I didn't make it. I just put it up there. It's not mine. Counting, this is kind of your knowledge construction piece here, right? You have to know this stuff. You have to know that stuff. Kids come to me in grade 8. They're not going to find the volume of a cylinder if they don't know bed mass. And if they can't do their multiplication tables, then they're certainly not going to know bed mass, and they're not going to be able to find the volume of a cylinder. There's the knowledge construction piece. Learning to code so we can code to learn. Learning to read so we can read to learn. Multiplication tables, volume of the cylinder. There's a progression there. So anyway, computational thinking, mathematical thinking, but ultimately we want to put kids at that sweet spot in the middle. So what does that mean? Simulating, data mining, automating, gaming, robotics, all these pieces. Well, I said earlier when I started, I was told intermediate teachers run a tight ship, so there was no way we were gaming in my classroom. Unheard of. And I would fight Clash of Clans till I was blue in the face. Remember that game? Already that old? You don't remember Clash of Clans? Oh! And I thought, instead of fighting this thing, I need to use it as a teaching tool. And Clash of Clans actually became one of the best resources to teach playing for Earth. Because there are 3 currencies in that game. And who doesn't love Clash of Clans?
I don't know you, big buffet boy 85. But if you think you can humiliate me and take my gold, think again. I am coming for you with lots of barbarians and dragons. I can't wait to destroy your village. While you beg for mercy, but you will get no mercy. I will have my revenge.
Liam? Have stone from Liam?
Son, Liam, you'll regret the day you crossed Angry East 52.
Yeah, that's good, right? Being in Windsor, we get the Super Bowl ads from Detroit when we turn the cable off to watch the Super Bowl game and turn on the aerial TV. So I gotta tell you a story about kids in my classroom that did some coding to learn without any explicit teaching, without me being in the room telling them what to do. They wanted to pull it off themselves. And it began by me thinking I would be that super cool hipster grade 8 teacher who bought all of the last of the Canadian pennies. The year the penny went away, I went out and I grabbed 30 of these pennies. I thought I'm going to give one to every kid in my class. Such a nice little memento, of course. Half of them thought it was lame, but I know the other half still have that penny to their today. They didn't think about their grade 8 experience, which is totally arrogant of me to think. But hey, I gave them all the penny. So get out a piece of paper and make a T-chart. Very explicit. I was very, very explicit. Telling them what to do. Spoon feeding them, walking them through the whole process, if you will. Get out a piece of paper, make a T-chart, put T and put H in that T-chart, because today we're doing probability. And they went, okay, and they followed along. They did that. They got out the piece of paper. My curriculum says we have to do experimental probability. We're going to flip this coin a bunch of times, but we're going to talk about theoretical probability. That's also in my curriculum, in that the more times we do this experiment, the closer it should get, in theory, to what it should be all the time. That's called the law of large numbers. That's the grade 7 and 8 probability curriculum. Okay. Now, I had just gotten a smart board, and the smart notebook timer was super engaging in those days, so I would love to put up the smart notebook timer all the time. I was engaging. Bells and whistles, smart notebook timer, everything had a time on it. Everything. Which was a terrible assumption. I assumed all kids could do whatever my task was in that same amount of time. It's like, I want everyone to flip that coin once. And I want you to raise your hand if you got heads. I remember having 24 people in the class. How many hands do you think went up? Raise your hand if you got heads, I said. Okay, folks, renewed math strategy. I had 24 kids in my class. Raise your hand if you got heads after that first flip. In theory, how many hands went up? Thank you. Yeah, you all know. In theory, yeah. It was about that. And I remember saying, okay, look around the room. How many hands are up? And, of course, the kids that already have it are like, oh, yeah, about 50%. Other kids are like, I haven't a clue. Don't know why hands are up. I don't know why I'm sitting here. I don't know what's going on. I thought, okay, I'll come over and conference with you in a second. Everybody flip that coin a second time. Raise your hand if you got heads. How many hands went up? Oh, you're good. 6. Because there can only be heads, tails, tails, tails. And out of 24, 4 plus the results, 6. And it was about that. I said, look around the room again. I've got a little bit of a diagnostic going on. We're doing a little probability teachable moment. I said, what do you think would happen if we flipped 50 times? You know, there's that one kid that says, can we do it? Right, we can. I've already got the timer up. You know what's coming. Set the timer for 15 minutes. Put it on, pushed play, made a terrible assumption that all kids could flip a coin 50 times and that they all would within that 15-minute window. I said, I'm feeling good today, folks. I turned on the radio. They went, Mr. A, it's not art class. I said, I know. Feeling progressive. I turned on the radio. I walked around the room. That smart notebook timer's going. I walked to the first table, and there's a bunch of students, and they're like, we just want to read. All right, kids, we just want to read. And you know, in your mind, there's probably more value in that book than my lesson. I know this. Right? I'm like looking at the book, and I'm like, that's beyond my reading level. We just want to read. Okay, but I need you to just placate me. What do you think would happen if you flip this? Rebecca, who's gifted, in my grade 8 classroom. Ugh. Well, Miss Ray, it might be 50-50. It might not be. In fact, it probably won't. But if you ask me to flip it 100 times, chances are it'll be closer to 50-50 than if I did it in that 50 sample set. I'll come back. I walk over to the next table, and this kid's like, he threw his penny at me, and I'm like, accident report, not good. There's a kid over here with a Ziploc bag. There's no more pennies. Can I have your penny? Can I have your penny? And I'm like, this went way better in the smart notebook lesson I just read on my prep. But I wasn't ready to feel vulnerable, so I had to let the timer run out. That was a big shift in my pedagogy. I couldn't admit it was failing. I went and closed the door because it was a gong show and I'd lost control. I needed that bell to ring at the end of 40 minutes. Back over to the radio. Sorry, folks, a little loud in here. Turn that down. No, we still have 7 minutes left. Kids are still reading at the front. At the end of class, Gavin approaches me and says, Miss Stray, I'm going to build you an app so you can teach that better next year. Gavin, go sit down before I throat punch you. Gavin was a good-looking, athletic grade 8 boy, very popular. So we had that, you got to take each other down a peg when the ego gets a little big. That was me and Gavin. He would do it to me. Now, the thing about Gavin is he had a learning disability, and so communication was a problem for him. He didn't mean to be disrespectful. He wanted to actually be helpful. I don't like to put kids in a box, but was heading to an applied stream in high school, because we stream kids in Ontario here in grade 9, heading to an applied stream, IEP, not on a modified program, strong in math, but a lot of accommodations. So when he said, I'm going to build an app to help you teach that better, in the moment, of course, I was frustrated. But the next day I said, Gavin, come talk to me about that. Like, what are you talking about? He said, Mr. Ray, it's so simple. We've been exploring Scratch since September. And I said, I know, like Scratch is a challenging tool, and putting kids in that space allows me to learn about who gets frustrated quickly. I was looking at the learning skills. I like looking at Scratch through the competency piece, through the ISTE standards, 20% of competencies, whatever label you want to put on it. The self-regulation, the resiliency, the perseverance. Who wants to quit because it's too friggin' hard, and who wants to keep going with it? Who's not interested in it? Because for me, I want to expose everybody to coding, but it's just another tool in the belt. I don't mandate coding in my classroom. That would be a terrible approach in terms of pedagogy. So he said, okay, well, I'm going to build this app. There's a random modulator function in Scratch. And I said, yeah, there is. It'll pick a random number and return it to you. So what do you want to do? He said, well, I'm going to pick a random number between 0 and 1. And if it's 0, it's heads. If it's 1, it's tails. And I went, yes. And he said, can I do it in math? I said, genius hours on Friday. Because that's where I was in my own pedagogy. So I had a student who approached me and wanted to do, quote-unquote, passion project, buzzword. Wanted to do a passion project in math class. He said, I want to build this app for you. I wasn't prepared for that. You can't do that. What's the rest of the class going to do? I've got my textbook lesson ready to roll here. Anyway, long story short, he was working on it. It took days and days and days for him to pull this off. His parents said he was working on it all the time at night, emailing me all the time saying, we don't know what he's doing. I said, just ask him about large numbers, please. And he comes to me with this group of buddies on a Friday morning. He said, it's done. It works. It's done. I said, boys, 8 o'clock in the morning, what are you doing here early? So you don't have to come to school on Fridays. That was the type of kids these were. Mr. Ray, it's done. I said, what do you want to do? Put it on a smartboard. We got to show everybody. I said, boys, go outside. You know it takes 15 minutes to turn on the desktop computer. Anybody in IT in the room? Slim down the image, please. Slim it down. They all come in, the bell rings, these kids are beaming ear to ear. I'm like, oh God, please tell me that this thing worked because I didn't see it ahead of time. Tell me I didn't set him up for failure. This is the biggest honor wall he's ever had. He's never had his work on display in his 10 years of school. Boy, that was hard. 10 years of school coming into grade 8. He never really had his work on display. He said, okay, Mr. Ray, go and click that green flag. Remember, we're coding to learn. We're not learning to code. I'm doing probability. I'm not doing Scratch. I said, okay, so I go over, I click. Am I clicking? I'm not clicking. Now I'm clicking. Go over to the green flag at the top. I click the green flag to see what happens, and then I'm storing all of the data. The coin flips. I went, wow, that's cool. One flip, 100% tails. It just says 1. It doesn't say 100. That's feedback. We'll get to that after, Gavin. I'm not concerned about that stuff. So that's cool. You made it animate. He said, yeah, I wouldn't download an app from the App Store if I didn't get that kind of experience. The numbers were just changing, and it was really boring to me. And I said, how did you make the coin do that? He said, well, I kept its X position at 0 because I wanted it to be at the origin, and I changed its Y. I made it a positive to make the coin go up and down. I went, oh, you did you, Gavin? You did some geometry while building this coin flipper. Interesting. And, of course, I'm making my anecdotal notes, observation, conversation, whatever growing success says. That's what I was doing. And I just say EQA, no? Feel free to clap. We're heading there. Woo! So he says, click the green flag again. All right, Gavin, I will appease you. I will click the green flag again. I said, Gavin, why did you make this app? Well, Mr. A, I wanted to prove your theory wrong. What theory is that? I don't know. The one you were talking about that says it should always be 50-50 all the time. All right, I keep clicking this green flag. I'm like, that's cool, too. 33-66. Wow, it's actually doing something. 50-50, stop. I flipped it one more time, and I stopped at 60-40. And I did this intentionally because this became, his app became my lesson. So in front of the whole class, I said, Gavin, there's a bug in your program. I said, what do you mean? I said, well, you built me a coin flipper. Shouldn't it be 50-50? No, Mr. A, this is the experiment. Oh, so you understand experimental probability. Okay. I said, Gavin, if I refresh this page and I flip the coin again 5 times, am I going to get the same results? He said, you might. You might not. Which told me he didn't hack the classroom and hard code it. It was truly random. And then I said, okay, Gavin, why is there a turbo button? Mr. A, trying to prove your theory wrong. I said, what did you do? Well, Mr. A, I took all of my code and I put it in a loop. When you click that button, it's going to ask you for a big number. And that big number gets stored in a variable you don't see. And then that coin flips that number of times. The thing about Logo and Scratch and this approach to learning, beyond simply coding, this student product, I'm throwing out the growing success jargon, this student product is just the tip of the iceberg. The process that went into this is just as important as what we're seeing here. Because what we're seeing here, in fact, doesn't really look like much, but it took hours and blood, sweat, and tears to pull it off to make sure it was truly working the way he wanted it to, completely bug-free. So I said, okay, turbo button, what do you want to do? I want to flip it 1,000,000 times. Me too. So I clicked that turbo button, I think. How about this one? I clicked that turbo button. Nope, I didn't click the turbo button. I put on Angry Birds. I clicked that turbo button, and I put in 1,000,000, a very, 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 very large number. Oh, we already saw that. Let's try this one. And we watched it, and this was another big shift in pedagogy for me, because what I had done by putting this on my smartboard, I was no longer the front of the room. I was no longer sitting at the front of the room because I could now no longer use my smartboard because it was dedicated to, here we go, it was dedicated to his app. So a big shift in pedagogy now. I'm no longer the sage on the stage, whatever that saying is. I'm no longer up here dictating because I can no longer use my smartboard as that presentation tool. So we put in 1,000,000, we watched this thing go, and for the first time in my teaching career, I had a student create an app. We talked about Stammer model and redefinition. I had a student create an app that demonstrates the law of large numbers. So he created a virtual manipulative that demonstrates theoretical probability. We're at 700 flips already. We're almost 50-50 to the second decimal point, something I could never do in my classroom with just the penny. But it's important for kids to go through that manual process with the penny first and then automate it second. Remember, we're coding to learn. We're not learning to code. He did this to demonstrate theoretical probability. Now, we have to also keep in mind his profile. Grade 8, learning disability, having to apply, has just done this. What do I give him in probability? Okay, I'll give him a level 4. I teach intermediate. What does that mean? 81? Anyone? No, I can't do that. He's going to apply. 75. I make fun because that's ultimately the reality of the system in which we teach and which we live. We have to think about that. So I've got this student now. How do I quantify this? How do I quantify this experience? Observation, conversation, and a student product that demonstrates mastery. And I have to put a mark on a report. I can't do it. It's not possible in elementary school for me to actually do that. So that was a big shift for me. We're running out of time, so let me just talk about a few big ideas in education. Number one is the idea of embracing failure. Because after all, we're here talking about coding and computational thinking. And coding is a great place to try something new, to take a risk, and to fail. I have Angry Birds up here because Rovio spent 6 years working on Angry Birds before any of their apps were successful. And if we had put those developers in a high school setting, we would have asked them to repeat a process and expected different outcomes, which is what Einstein says is insanity. So I believe that we have to redefine what it means to fail at school. Failure is no longer a 4 out of 10. Failure is shit, that didn't work. What can I change? I'm going to go and I'm going to try it again. If we truly want to encourage risk-taking and failure, time can no longer be that constant. And I'm mindful of the fact that we've got the 300 math minute mandate happening now, but if we're really doing a project-based learning approach and spiraling everything, the minutes become blurred. We don't need the timetable. We're doing math all the time. We're doing language all the time. We're doing science all the time. And coding is a place to have those pedagogical conversations first before we start looking at other areas like math and like language and like science. Once we agree that school is nothing more than an idea we've all agreed to follow, the possibilities become limitless. Now, we live in a time where today's technology is the worst our students will ever use, but somebody decided to code this so that we could archive our planet. And I am forever grateful because not only can I stand here and look at Papa's house like I did when I was 13 years old, but I can now scroll back to 2009. This is the world in which I live. I can scroll back to 2009. Papa was outside when that Google truck went by. And here we are in 2018, 6 years after his passing. I can still say hi. Love you, Papa. That's the world in which I live because somebody decided to code that. Somebody wanted to solve that problem. I'm going to go back to Patrick because it's really important. Learning to master programming is learning to become highly skilled at isolating and correcting bugs. But the question to ask about the program is not whether it's right or wrong, but if it's fixable. If this way of looking at intellectual products were generalized to how the larger culture thinks about knowledge and its acquisition, we might all be less intimidated by our fears of being wrong. Think about that in math class. Math is a big, big, big piece. As a phys ed teacher, I don't put my kids on the foul line and ask them to take 10 foul shots and grade them based on how many they got out of 10 because they would all fail. So why do I do it in my math class? Why do I give them the worksheet of the same 10 questions? I was doing that. Why do I do that? And then why do I evaluate based on how many they got right? You don't inspire other people by showing them how powerful you are. I think this is a wonderful quote, and my kids have taught me this. It's not about me, it's about them. And it's about you folks. I'm so grateful that you're here at 8 o'clock in the morning on Wednesday of Connect to have a conversation about coding, computational thinking, and to listen to me. I'll leave you with one final thought because somebody challenged my thinking in Vancouver. A superintendent said to me, you talk about coding and you talk about assessment and evaluation. For whatever it's worth, I just want to be done with the evaluation side of things in terms of grades in elementary school. Let's just get rid of that stuff and let's just focus on really good, effective feedback and assessment side of things to help kids keep moving, because that's the ultimate goal. When a newborn is learning to walk for the first time, parents stand 10 steps apart. The newborn has never walked before. That baby stands up, takes their first 2 steps, and falls. What do the parents do? Yes! 2 steps! They don't say you got 2 out of 10, sucker. Like, I'll see you after recess. No, you got 2. Tomorrow it's 4, and then it's 7, and then it's 10. We're going to master walking. And after you've done that, I'm going to teach you to run, ride a bike, roller skate, and eventually drive. I think about this when I plan my math tasks. We can't plan lessons based on evaluation. Evaluation cannot drive instruction. Oh, we're doing this today because I need a health mark. Can't be that way. Can't be that way. But I've done that. Think about that the next time you're planning a lesson. In a world that changes overnight, we have to encourage our students. The only risk in failing is not trying anything new. My name's Brian Aspinall. I believe all kids can achieve if given a fair chance. Thank you so much for coming on a Wednesday at Connect. Have a wonderful conference. I hope that we can have a coffee or some other beverage at some point, but not till at least noon.